All right. Well, welcome everyone to another panel here at NASFiC. And my name is Victor Raymond, and I'm the moderator for the panel on myths and legends. And with me today are Alma Alexander and Chris Silverspook Miller. And Alma, would you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Alma Alexander. I write fantasy, science fiction, and yes, a lot of mythological and legendary underpinnings go into that. Um, I had been tapped to lead with a story about a modern mythology once we start the panel itself, so I'll get on with that later. But in the meantime, I've got about 20 published books, and my website's at almaalexander.org if anybody wants to go and visit me there.
Right. Thank you. Chris?
Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Miller, also known as Silverspook online. I'm my main day job is game developer at the independent game studio. Basically, it's just myself at Silverspook Games. I'm the artist, writer, programmer, musician, and half of the voice acting for a game called Neo Feud that's on the poster there. And it's a game about it's a cyberpunk adventure game about social, political, and economic inequality, the prison industrial and military industrial and police industrial complexes. I wrote this game. I wrote it a long time ago, 10 years ago. It's very pertinent, deals directly with police murder of marginalized people with no recourse. But it's something that's I wish it would have been solved earlier, but I mean, we're doing our best that we can. And so my game is about my personal experiences as a person of color growing up in the United States. I'm a native Hawaiian, but I grew up in a ghetto in Honolulu. And it's my personal experiences that I never got to really talk about in the AAA game companies or even medium-sized big game companies. And so that's part of why I started Silverspook Games. And my other background, I have a computer science BA, but I worked as a STEM teacher, robotics coach, social worker for the under risk and at-risk and underserved youth, marginalized people, Honduran asylum seekers for white people, colonized Hawaiians and Black people, Micronesian migrants, 30% homeless kids. So that's my experiences in dealing with the inequities in society. And so, yeah, that's me.
Great. Thank you. My background as a moderator for the panel, I've been involved with running science fiction conventions for a very long time. I'm trained as a sociologist. My doctorate is in sociology with an emphasis on social inequality. But in addition to those things, I've been active in LGBTQ plus rights. I've also worked as a community organizer in inner city Midwestern American cities. And I'm a founding member of the Carl Brandon Society, which you can find at carlbrandon.org, which deals with building the visibility of people of color in speculative media. So I think we're all tapped for slightly different pieces of this panel idea. But we ended up having some discussion before the panel, and one of the things about myths and legends that we all, great, thank you, that we ended up thinking about was, well, here's this one particularly major moment in modern culture, and that's Star Wars. And Alma, you had a thought or two to get us going on that.
Yeah, I was just remembering at age 15 walking into a movie theater where Star Wars was playing for the first time. And this, for me, the world broke into before Star Wars and after Star Wars. And I just got changed fundamentally by getting brushed by that mythos. And it wasn't mythos at that point. It was just a movie. It was just a movie. It was just a story. It was just something. It grew into a thing. It grew into a tentacled thing. It's everywhere now. And at one point, much later, when they remastered the whole original thing, and I remember I was standing in a queue to go and see that in the cinema, and there was a couple of 13-year-old punks in front of me discussing Star Wars and opining on it, and I was kind of standing behind them and going, "You little whippersnapper, you weren't even born the first time I walked into Star Wars." But the thing about that is that you kind of get to own your legends. And for me, Leia was something that resonated with me in a kind of mythological way. I mean, she's been since been made into a Disney princess, if you like. But for me, ever since I met her, she's been the princess. And when she grew older with me and stepped out of the starship and the later movies, and it was like mythology was growing into life, and it was a very, very moving experience.
Yeah. Chris, do you have any thoughts on that? I have a couple thoughts myself, but please go ahead if you have anything.
I can just specifically on Star Wars. I also remember when I first saw Star Wars, I think it was Empire Strikes Back, which dates me. I was five, six. I remember I watched it. What I most vividly remember was my dad's. He took us to this Chinese restaurant. I remember it was the Silver Dragon restaurant, and he said, "Son, if you want to be a Jedi like Luke Skywalker, this is Jedi soup. The Force is in this soy sauce, in this miso. You eat this miso soup, you will be a Jedi." And I remember like believing that with all of my heart, I would be a Jedi, and the lightsaber would come out, and I would save the universe. And so it's been with me forever. Yeah.
And the Force has been with you ever since.
Exactly.
Well, and it's that moment. I mean, that transformative moment in 1977. I sort of talk about, the victory of science fiction in the culture wars in 1977. But it was an interesting thing that took place. I mean, you talked about going to the cinema and seeing the movie, seeing Star Wars, not Episode 4, but Star Wars. And I was, and now we all get to date ourselves, right? I was in high school myself at the time, and a friend of mine from high school said that it was my one moment of prescience that she remembers. And I said, "Only one?" She said, "No, don't get too out there, Raymond." But I asked her what it was, and she said, "Well, yeah, everybody at the time was saying, oh, it's this summer movie. It's not going to do anything." And I remember being so blown away when I saw it for the first time that I apparently came out of the theater, and I told her, I said, "Just you wait, this is going to be huge." And nice to be right. Okay. But even so, it has turned out that way. And as, let's say, Valerie has commented, that this is part, this super franchise is definitely one of our modern myths now. And yes, it also draws on, and for all the discussions with George Lucas and other people, who've helped put it together, this idea of the chosen one, very traditional fantasy, right? And that I think has contributed to its success. That it's a story that we already know, right? It's a myth that's already there.
Mythology. Part of the reason it became so huge is because it tapped into that mythology. We all recognize Star Wars.
Uh-huh.
There's a new kind of a face on it, but most of us who went in there went, "I know this story. I love this story. I'm in this story now because it's new for me."
Right. And there's also a mention here in our chat of the other big media science fiction influence has been Star Trek. Yes, there we go. Star Trek. Yeah, it's like, wait a second, that we actually learned to do that, right? And from all of the fan fiction, and I suppose one thing we could say is that fan fiction is itself this ferment of myth making going on as people build new stories out of the things that they know, right?
As far as Star Trek is concerned, going back to the original one, which is I think what we're starting to talk about here, but going back to the original Star Trek, part of it was a different kind of mythology, yes, but there was a sub-layer to that, which was the mythology of, well, how do I put this? The four musketeers, all for one and one for all. We had that relationship going with the main four characters in that, Kirk, Spock, McCoy, Scotty, who were a team, who were the sort of indivisible whole. And I'm not sure that maybe the new generation tried up to a point, but everything else that came after, they never reproduced that kind of thing. there wasn't that core theme, that core team that that was the fundamental to the franchise.
Well, let me ask that as a question. How much of that do you think is due to the evolution in technologies that have related to media that Star Trek, when it first came out in the mid 60s, was during a period of time where people didn't expect to have shows tie together very much over time. There was no time binding that was expected of them. But later on, you get Hill Street Blues and other television series where there's an overarching plot, and that changes the relationship, the dynamic of the storytelling, right? And I mean, these are possibilities in terms of how I think if you look at each series on the moment, it's that I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. They're speaking to the moment at which they're made, right? So original Star Trek is in the mid 60s dealing with those issues, and we see that very clearly. And each successive series has been addressing the zeitgeist of the moment.
Yes, I would agree with that.
And we have a question here, Chris. I don't want to cut away to that. Do you have a thought on that regard, or shall we?
Actually, I was looking at the same question, so maybe you can read that.
Yeah, let's go to that. Okay, so what is the myth and what is the culture shift that happens in these super franchises that Valerie names? Is it old mythology made fresh? Is there anything new in it at all? Now we have a substantive question to respond to.
Yes and no, and sometimes, and there is a whole different story going on here. But I think the whole point of mythology is that it's something that we create to explain things for ourselves, and it gets reinvented all the time. And yes, there's new stuff that's being put on the face of it, because otherwise we really would still be telling the Greek God's mythology. So we reinvent the thing for ourselves, for our times. We put on new faces on old tropes, if you like, and we trot them all out to perform like prancing ponies. But the mythologies, the explanatory substratum of it all, I think that is something that is psychologically familiar to all of us in that kind of I mean, think about this I watched a beautiful pseudo documentary, which I kind of lost since I taped it, and I lost it, and I'm really sorry about that. But it treated dragons as completely natural history real. It basically examined dragons as existing for real, and the physiology, how they breathe fire, how they mate, where they came from, all this kind of thing. They actually literally took the mythology and they made it true. And what they came up with is something that kind of stuck with me, and that is that there are cultures. There's Wales, there's China, there is Middle Europe, there is, I don't know, America, all these cultures that didn't have anything to do with each other, independently invented dragons somehow. So how do these things actually fit together? Were they really dragons?
Which is part of how we respond on the moment. Chris, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think in terms of mythology, it is interesting. Again, I'm Hawaiian. Just to kind of give some of my own. There are dragon-esque creatures in Hawaiian mythology. The mo'o comes to mind. The story of these very large lizards that are no longer around. I think part of the dragon story is basically the human beings killed. It's a story of ecocide, actually. It's like there aren't dragons anymore because humans killed all the mammals, and all the rest of them will be gone soon. So in a weird sense, right? It's kind of like no, but back to the mo'o. It's just as one of the myths. The place that I'm from, actually, it's an area called Kalihi on the island of Oahu, in Hawaii, and the entire mountain ridge that is on the, it's Ahupua'a system was from the mountain to the sea. The entire ridge that I'm from was believed to be one giant sleeping mo'o, or giant sleeping lizard that whose tail rested in the ocean, in the waters, part of which is Waikiki down there, which is its own mythology about Hawaii Five-O and 51st Dates. But I mean, that myth of that dragon, or mo'o, as we would call it, is something that my brother, who works in the land-based and sustainability, when he takes school groups and other folks coming to do, he does like reforestation, taking out alien invasive trees, but and putting in like native indigenous trees back in, and etc. But while they go on these hikes, they talk about them all. And this is the rock. This is the nose of it. There's a one specific rock, and I'm just trying to tie this all back in. And I think that like there is something that definitely ties. And everybody came up with myths that tied also to the celestial heavens. Like Maui's fishhook is also Scorpio, and there's stories of Maui's fishhook. You can watch them. Disney unfortunately didn't give us a cut native wines for Moana, but it's a good story. It's a good story in Moana. Very well done. But anyway, there's definitely a lot of mythology that ties it all together. And I mean, to kind of shift it forward, like what is the mythology? I think part of what the question is like, what is, and one thing I was thinking about shifting it forward was, what is the mythology that holds the present world together? Because these are ancient mythologies, but what are the mythologies and what are the conflicts between like a lot of these indigenous peoples, or these peoples from hundreds, thousands of years ago? What were the myths that held empires together, right? And continue to hold them together, whether that's Rome, the Holy Roman Empire, or with the Christendom, and because these have their own myths that conflicted with the myths and the stories of indigenous people in Europe, indigenous people in the United States. And that's something that I wrestle with that all the time, because my parents, they are my skin color, but they don't. My dad always wanted to be a cowboy. He wanted to be John Wayne. He was like bang bang gun gun. And that in Catholicism, it was like, son, you're going to be part of the Holy Roman Catholic Empire, and you're going to be a John Wayne American, star-spangled savior of the world. And I was like, but Dad, but what about all this other mythology? And it was like, well, that's old, that's gone, that's savage, that's dead, that's in a textbook somewhere. And we're not going to talk about that's in a museum now. There's a little fish. You can see Maui's fishhook in the museum. Watch the Disney movie and go to sleep. Watch some Star Wars, right? And I mean, not to put down Star Wars, but I'm just saying, like, there is the myths and stories that hold peoples, countries, cities, towns, and then finally international neoliberal conglomerates together. These things they are great, but they're also there is ongoing conflict and a war in society at all times between two different stories. Is America equality, freedom, democracy, prosperity, or is it an oppression factory where people still are slaves and still are colonized? And so anyway, I'm going to leave it there.
When you think about mythology that is old and new, and mythologies that overthrow other mythologies, and I mean, obviously the kind of religious aspect of it has to be in there. When you think about the fact that we had a world at some point which was filled with gods, because we were inventing gods to, well, there's thunder and there's lightning, so there's got to be a god in charge of that. So this is what we did with mythology. We explained the world in terms of, somebody's got to be doing something about all this. But then a bigger mythology came out there, and all of a sudden, all of those gods somehow got thrown over by the legions of Christ and Jehovah, and that new godhead that turned up, and that myth, if you like, just overran the old myth completely. And now, as you say, it's in the museum. It's Maui's fishhook is hanging there, and so is the Zeus's thunderbolt and all of that stuff. What happens afterwards? What happens when something new comes along and runs over Christianity?
This is a good question.
That is a good question.
Well, to the extent that Christianity is itself, and in fact, interestingly enough, many sort of conventional organized religions have been facing a loss of believers, that the number of people who consider themselves to be non-religious in the United States has grown significantly over the past quarter century. Used to be a much smaller percentage. Now it's, I think the last studies I saw indicated that it's like close to 20%. And regardless of what people's religious beliefs are, I think what this has to do with, how do these things speak to people? How do they, are these meaningful ways to understand the world? And I think part of the transformative aspect of this is that we may not know what's going to come after Christianity or after, contemporary religions until it's already happened, right? And certainly there's some new religious movements that like to position themselves to be those successors, and only time will tell if that actually happens. I did want to get back to a point that Chris made a little bit earlier, and that was talking about the role of, this relationship between sort of dominant culture perspective and groups that have been subordinated, like Native people and others. I'm trying to remember where I saw this, and I should have written it down, but there was an excellent essay that appeared sometime in the past year or two, looking at zombie movies, right? I don't know, Chris, if you saw this essay, but it was an interesting look at zombie essays. Excuse me, for zombies. I'm getting confused here. Looking at zombie media, films, television shows, all this stuff from the perspective of, well, yeah, that's how Native people, how Indigenous people experienced European colonization.
Yeah.
We can't get away.
That's, I can see that very, very clearly.
We can't get away. And all they want to do is eat our brains, and and it's
and you can't stop them, and they keep on coming.
And we have to retreat, and we have to go someplace safe. And it was this very powerful essay, which I should probably go back and dig up. But it resonated with me personally, right? But it also was a whole different take on understanding what was going on in what was ostensibly, oh, look, there's, zombies and, zombies and people with guns, and what about that, right? Well, what about that?
Yeah, I mean, well, just jumping off, there is a quote. I don't have the credit for the author, but I believe it goes, for Indigenous people, for colonized people, the apocalypse has already happened. We've been living through the apocalypse for the last 500 years, right? So, which is basically a zombie apocalypse, right? So that they interpret it similar. There's a great book by, I believe it's Rebecca Rowanhorse Rex. You probably know this. Trail of Lightning, I believe, which is, it's an apocalyptic situation in which the last surviving it's the Indigenous people are actually walled in, I believe, and inside of, I forget, I believe it's the Dene tribe or Dene peoples in North America, and so but it's a kind of a part of Afro-Indigenous futurism or African futurism, Indigenous futurism, like retelling of these kind of traditional stories, and that's part of something that I'm interested in. Technically, my game is Neofut is a kind of alternate Indigenous futurism of cyberpunk, but on the zombie topic specifically, I also find it interesting because, I mean, just as an example, because somebody brought up the Muslims, and what is the mythology? Not only the mythology of Christianity and America as a Christian country under God, right? That's actually been fought right now in the current convention. I believe I think that some people are calling out the DNC. You remove under God, you remove that you're not Christian as a political move. That's the power of that story, the Christendom that survives thousands of years. And I think that and just in a 2000 remake of George Romero. George Romero is the other Indigenous game developer, actually. But George Romero, the zombie movie, it's George Romero that directed Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, I believe, right? He doesn't come out and say this is a capitalist or consumerist critique, right? But you have mindless, brainless things like eating everything in a mall or just coming after you mindlessly consuming, right? But it's not directly necessarily anti-consumerist in a Brave New World sort of sense, but it's not authoritarian. It's definitely not like, it's not like a very hawkish jingoistic movie, but there was there's a version of that came out shortly after the 2001 and the beginning of the $21 trillion forever wars, as we might call them, in Iraq, Afghanistan, et cetera, when they were just ramping up. And it was the Zack Snyder remake. And the mythology that was crafted there in terms of zombies, you had this in the beginning, you had, I believe the main character is a cop. There's a cop and it's in a suburb as opposed to in a mall. And in the beginning of the George Romero, the police and the mayor are like haphazardly, kind of like United States 2020, just bumbling its COVID response. The mayor is and the police chief are like bumbling their response to the outbreak. But in the Zack Romero, the Zack Snyder remake, the police is the protagonist in a suburb defending from these hordes, and then it cuts in the beginning to. It shows a bunch of like, flesh rending, disgusting zombies chewing on Americans. And then it cuts to Muslims doing their prayers. And in that brief snippet, there was a myth making, or, I'm not going to say what exactly, but there is a demonization of one myth, right? And one people for, I'm not going to say why, but I mean, and I'm not saying that that's what the director intended, but there was definitely a ramping up toward we have been attacked. We are victims, and we now must pursue this indefinite war on terror, war on everything, war on ourselves and our civil liberties, right, under the Patriot Act and all these things. But when we, so that was the myth that built the naughties, really, right? And anyway, I'll stop there.
There's a definite kind of dichotomy between myth as darkness, which is what you're talking about, and myth as light, which is the sort of candle in that darkness that some people hold up. I'm thinking of something like Camelot, the movie version of the song with "Don't Let It Be Forgot, for one brief shining moment there was Camelot." Basically, you're holding a moment in that darkness up like that, and it may be the wrong moment. Right. It may well be the wrong moment. It may be that a snap like that, what you're talking about, juxtaposing one image onto the next, you're suddenly holding the wrong candle in the dark.
Yes. And sometimes people then, it takes a while for the whole response to that to work its way through as we tell news stories about these things to try to find our way in that darkness. And sometimes we take stories and we transform them, right? We take things and we change them in order to make them more relevant, or more, not even just relevant, but speaking to something that we may experience ourselves. One of the comments we've got here from Valerie Frankel, she notes that a big indicator of our changing our myths is Frozen. Don't depend on the prince. Don't fall in love at first sight. Frozen comes across very much as a fairy tale, and given its background, yeah, sure, but it's speaking with a very modern sensibility in a way that I think, truth be told, I think it's a fairy tale right up until the moment until she realizes, no, I can't rely on this guy. Right, he's going to take advantage of my situation, and I think that's some of what happens with many of these things. We're trying to take them. Sometimes it works, like there. Sometimes it does things we're not so happy about, like what happened with Dawn of the Dead.
But we have to figure out to what point it is self-correcting, and to what point we have to work towards pushing it back to the right direction, if you like, because in some ways it is very easy to just follow the light. We are all moths in that kind of context. We follow the light, and whoever's holding the light that we see is the light that we will follow. And it depends on how much strength of mind we've got to fight against that wrong light if we're following it. And if we have the strength of mind to turn back into the darkness and look for something different, something better, something that is real.
How do we both how does this all resonate with us, and how do we both take that in, but at the same time not get taken in,
Yeah.
as it were. Yeah. We have another comment here in. Did you know that the phrase "under God" was added to the Pledge of Allegiance in the 1950s to contrast us with communism? Yes, actually, and it's yeah, particularly the United States is very much a country around wanting to tell myths and legends about itself. Chris, you were talking about how your dad wanted to be John Wayne and a cowboy. You know, isn't it the case, actually, let me throw this out there, isn't it the case right now in the US that we are um, we're in a moment of fighting over what is the United States, that this idea of what it is that it represents. And it ties back to things like, Chris, we were talking before the panel about like all the Marvel movies. You know, here are these superhero movies, and particularly with Captain America and all the rest of them. Isn't there a tie-in there? Aren't we telling stories in order to tell us, make us think more about this stuff?
I'll try to keep this short. As I said on the last two panels, I'm known for my 36 hour rant. So but yeah, exactly. I mean, particularly with the Captain America, the most recent Marvel movies, but really, you can ask Oliver Stone what he has to say about all of the depictions of police and military in all of Hollywood's productions. But I mean, just to keep it brief, specifically the superhero movies recently, I mean, you look at them, the highest grossing films of all time, right? Infinity War, the Avengers films, Iron Man, right? I believe they're multi-billion dollar. If you add them all up, it's like $3 billion. These films, who are the protagonists? Well, you have my favorite one: billionaire, philanthropist, arms dealer, playboys. Jeff Bezos crossed with the Koch brothers, crossed with Lockheed Martin. They're very cute, and Robert Downey is very witty, and he makes jokes about playing Galaga, and that's very. I feel nostalgic. He's very quick, he's very approachable, and he does a great job portraying this actor while eating blueberries on the set, making fun of Star Spangled Underpants. But at the same time, who is he really? Right? What are we actually? What is the meta narrative? What is the subtext that's being pushed into us? The best propaganda is not when you are being told the story. It's the world that is taken for granted, as I think we've talked about that on this at this convention previously in other panels. But so you have, that's the over narrative is billionaire, capitalism, American billionaire, weapons dealer, but he's also a good person. He's a philanthropist, right? Just like Bill Gates, he's a really good person. So those people are going to save the world from basically space Russians, or like space, some evil entity out there. And we have Captain America, is going to save the world with democracy, freedom, and prosperity, like I was talking about before. And I mean, it's not to say that America is never done anything good. I mean, right? But I mean, if you materially look at the material reality, I mean, we can't say that all of these wars that we're also talking about have brought democracy, prosperity. Iraq and Afghanistan, I mean, they're not doing too good. I mean, South Central America, parts of Asia, colonialism. I mean, right? It's and these myths serve to kind of like they not necessarily lie, but they paper over what is. They don't give the real version of what the United States is, or at least they're giving a very couched, very tailored version. And like let's just say, like, the majority of films have money, and DC comes in and they edit scripts, and they're not going to let certain narratives come through. The same reason why I couldn't tell my story. I was like, hey, Chris, they were like, Chris, we need you to like make this, Flappy Bird Clone 76. Because we got to make some money selling microtransactions. And I'm like, can we talk about maybe decolonization just a little? No, absolutely not. No. We're making money here. We're going to make what sells, and we're going to make whatever our corporate funders and whatever our executives are telling us to make. And I'm like, but I want to talk about, like, what about the experience of being like poor and brown in the United States? And they're like, no, we don't talk about that. We're not going to talk about that. So that's why I had to create my own company. So anyway, which is, anyway, I'll end on that. I think a lot of the possibility in storytelling is in, I mean, ideally, of course, we'd have like really big, Black Panther was great for at least giving an alternate version of African futurism. I don't know what the preferred term is, but basically like another version of what it means to be black in the world that's seen by billions of people, which is great. But I think there's a lot of possibility in smaller and independent, whether that's books, movies, games, etc., to tell these other stories because they need to be told. Yeah.
Here's a thought. What if we are all masters of our own personal mythologies, if you like, and the big myth happens when enough of those converge into a river and strong enough to carry it forward, kind of thing. But before that happens, we have to keep our own little light burning. We have to keep our own little myth going. We have to believe into our own idea of what is there and what is right and what should and what is good. And if enough people start thinking along that particular timeline, then something bigger happens. But until that happens, are we all stuck with holding our own little light in the dark, looking around saying, anybody there?
I would say yes. I would say, in fact, actually, it is when people holding on to their own light tell stories that take greater, they catch fire with other people, that you end up seeing change take place. I mean, in a way, what Chris is doing with his own game company is exactly that thing. You know, here is a counter narrative. Here is a different way of looking at things. And if it has relevance, if it has meaning, if it grabs you, then that's when things begin to change, right? And we can't always predict what are the things that are going to grab people. But when it does happen, we begin to see this whole cascading effect. Myths and legends being retold in new ways in order to tell us how to look at the world. Let's see here. Beth R. writes, Iron Man is trying to deal with the whole old white guy American industrial complex, and look where it got us in Iraq. Yeah, well, there is that. And Tony created a thinking robot that decided the only way to fix everything was to destroy it. Wait, we had to destroy the village in order to save it? Wait, oh no, is that too close? Did I go there? I did. I'm sorry. Marvel is telling us stories that help us struggle with where we've been and where we're going. Yes, well, but yeah, this whole old white guy American industrial complex, and look where it got us in Iraq.
Now, think of that scene that caused so much drama in a recent big thing, the Game of Thrones, when the white savior queen was being held among the arms of the big crowd of the black freed slaves going, Missa, mother, you're the white savior, you're the white queen, you're the thing that came to save us. We're completely incapable of doing anything until you came along, the blonde white princess who lead us out in the darkness. I mean, things like that occasionally come up and you kind of trip over them and you sit back and go, okay, really?
It's like Dances with Wolves.
Right? That too, yes.
Dances with Wolves. Here's Kevin Costner showing up as this crazy Washichu, white guy. And the Lakota that are just over the rise from where he's got his camp are like, actually, I have to tell you all something about that movie. So there's a scene in Dances with Wolves where the village has gotten together to talk about what to do about Costner's character, right? Dunbar. And they have this talk that takes place at night. And Win in His Hair talks about how this is a problem and we ought to get rid of this guy. And Kicking Bird gets up and says, no, we should extend our hospitality to him. And I went away from the movie thinking to myself, there was something wrong with that scene. And then I discovered what it was, which is that this is talking about my people, right? My tribe. And they would have taken much longer. They solved it in 15 minutes. I said, no, it's completely unrealistic. They would have kept talking about it all night long. But the other problem with that movie that really is unrealistic is, hey, wait a second, they needed a white guy in order to save themselves.
Kevin Costner, you always save, he saved the black woman in Hidden Figures too. He's always there to help you.
the white savior trope is really problematic. I mean, we've been down this road so many times with so many different stories, with so many different takes on it, and always somehow we end up in the same place. Look, there's all this savagery down here, and there's one civilized person who is coming along from somewhere outside who doesn't know anything about it, but who is still somehow better equipped to understand their world and to, make it better.
And we shouldn't look at the Matrix movies at all as an example of this, right? Okay. By the way, it's our 10-minute warning. We're getting close to being done. But yeah, I mean, here's another question which I think gets at the same issue. And that is a struggle we have here in the United States. I think that it's such a racist society that new ideas or myths that could help us get stalled because they have to appeal to the dominant culture just to be seen, which is, Chris, the thing that you were talking about directly, right?
Yeah. It's I mean, that's why I'm making a game that's sold, I think, like, well, I made the game while I was living in a van, like literally for part of it. I was teaching and doing social work full time, with under-resourced at-risk kids, but working like 8 or over 8 hours a day for a lot of it, basically homeless because it was $1,800 rent next to a meth lab above a highway in Honolulu, and not just Honolulu, in San Francisco and a lot of other places, and that informed the story of NeoFeed, which is the main character isn't a cop or a billionaire philanthropist, arms dealer playboy working with Captain Star Spangled Underpants. The main character is a social worker who is trying to help. It's a science fictionalized kind of account of my own life, working with 30 kids, trying to keep them out of gangs, the Bloods and the Crips, and shooting each other. Having their myth is the myth of Kanye, the myth of being a baller or getting 100 bands and fat stacks of Mercedes Benzes and just a lot of not good misogynist. I'm trying to play them Public Enemy and some radical, helping the people sort of original hip hop, but it's being countered by this other myth that's about the solution to poverty in the United States is to get guns, deal some meth, make it big, like I saw on my TV, and I literally had to learn how to rap battle the kids, but like, I'm rap battling my kids about the Constitution and how to not get shot by the cops and be arrested and dropped in prison to make Amazon Whole Foods and vegan, non-vegan goat cheese for the rest of your life for 25 cents an hour, or put out California's wildfires. And they're like, hey, no way I'm going to do that, because you know what the way to succeed in America, there's nothing that it's the bootstrap cowboy, but the black version. It's called, there's nothing, I'm going to be a better rapper. I'm going to be a better basketball player than a million other of my people from my neighborhood. I'm going to be the best. I'm going to have the gold chains. I'm going to have the flying Lamborghini, and I have the golden palace. That's really the story of NeoFeed. Is one of the main characters, the social worker trying to help his kid, who's a 16-year-old. He's a robot, right? But from broken out of he escaped from the super maximum facility for robot prison. Now he's a drug lord, and he's trying to help him get on a better path. But he can't hear it because he's too mythologized by this misdirection of an internally colonized the people of color, Black people, brown people. A lot of the kids I work with are not necessarily Black, but they all listen to the same stories of how to succeed. Sure. And I think that anyway, I got another 10 minutes. So I'll just cut it off there. But that story is, I've never seen that story told, and I don't think it ever would be told by the mainstream society. So, I sold, a handful of copies, and I did all the work myself, because that's the only way to do that kind of story.
Well, but this is kind of an interesting question. Do we find ourselves now in a time where even our counter myths are being taken over by a dominant culture perspective? I mean, this idea of, here we are trying to tell stories that have meaning, and we're battling against impressions that are being placed out there in ways that are that resonate with people, but maybe this isn't the light that they should be following, as you were saying, Alma. The idea that thinking that they'll make it in major league sports, or they'll be the best rapper. That's whether or not that's actually possible. Well, that's another myth.
Whether we're actually blundering around in in a field full of fireflies, and there's only one firefly that's the real one, but we have to figure out which the hell one it is before we get led into the marshes and drowned by them.
Well, right, and in particular, we're having some. We're facing the fact that we're now inundated with all these different kinds of media, trying to tell different stories, trying to build myths, and trying to deal with that it's overwhelming.
Join the resistance.
Join the resistance.
That's one thing we can all join the resistance. I mean, you know, don't join the hashtag resistance that's kind of like leading you to vote for somebody that isn't actually, but do join the actual resistance.
The actual resistance, yeah. We really, let's see, another comment here from Beth. We really need better and stronger good male role models of every color and persuasion in our media. And we also have at this point, our 4-minute mark. We're almost there. I think to the extent that people are looking for representation, yeah, wouldn't that be the case, that maybe some of our myth building is also about, as you've been telling us the entire time here, Chris, I think representation is key, right?
Yeah. Representation is key, and like definitely having role models, and simultaneously like being able to, you know, like I talked to some of my friends who I'm working on with some games, and said other games, and they you know, one of them is, you know, he grew up very poor in Texas, black in Texas. He was in an area that had drive-by shootings, and he's like, you know, this game, I've never felt like because some people be like, well, you know, we can't have stories like, we don't want to. It's kind of respectability. Like, we don't want to show like this because we want to show like people who look like Barack Obama only. And but it's important to show people who, you know, it's a fine line, right? Because we also have to tell the true story of what it is like to be colonized, or what it's like to be poor, what it's like to be ghettoized. But then also not just let it be like ghettoized, you know, like pornography, basically, like, oh, look at the misery pornography, right? Like, as some parts of Britain, they're known for these kind of shows, but they just show, look at all these chavs, all these cockney little lowborns, right? We don't want that either. So we want to have stories where you kind of like my friend said, I felt like I was seen for the first time, like in any media, movies, films, books, or anything, when I played your game. But then also, like, it ends, he's like moving towards the right direction. Like, you know, all that things that story of Kanye, the getting the glitz and the ices and the bling and the getting a RIA big contract. I thought I wanted that, but you know what I actually want? What I actually want is to join the actual resistance. I'm going to get out there with Black Lives Matter. You know, I'm going to like fight for all of us, not just for my personal career, right? So anyway, I think that's important too.
We are at the stage of final thoughts. We have one thought from, let's see here. A lot of supervillains are people who have correctly identified a problem but propose horrifying solutions. Cautionary tales are also part of myth and legend and storytelling, right?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think we're going to run out of time. We may have to take this to another venue. By the way, for those of you who want to continue the discussion, I think we can continue doing this on Discord once the panel is over. But Alma, Chris, Alma, what are your final thoughts on this panel? And we've wandered through many different subjects along the way.
Essentially, what join the resistance used to be a good thing to leave it on, but basically, you have to figure out for yourself really what you believe, how much you believe it, and how high a price are you willing to pay for hanging on to that belief in the face of everybody else believing something different, maybe. And that is where a legend or a myth is actually born. Somebody with enough strength of will to cling to their own idea and to know that this is right for them.
Oh my goodness. If only we had this earlier. Please share titles to read.
Go to Discord.
Go to Discord. Yes, go to Discord. Chris, any last thoughts?
Okay, last thoughts. I mean, yeah, I agree with everything that was said, and I mean to kind of wrap it back up into Star Wars. You know, I did appreciate the final episode where, you know, there's that I don't want to spoiler the last Star Wars at 9, but there are scenes in Star Wars where everybody comes together and they realize, you know, it's not just, I mean, just to go to the back thing, it's not just one of us, right? It's not just one cowboy or one emperor or one billionaire philanthropist. They may be arms dealer, but all of us together. No one superhero is going to save us from COVID-19, the war, economic collapse, a crumbling empire, climate disaster. It's going to take all of us. And so stories and myths that can encapsulate that, as opposed to just one superheroic entity. Definitely not the white dude. We hope to have more diversity, but encapsulating all of humanity is important. Those are important new myths that we can build.
And with that, we'll wrap up. Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun, and we can continue talking on Discord. Scioto Room odd. So thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thanks a lot.
Thank